the various things to be concerned and or inspired about this week. And trust me, there's a lot on both accounts. How are you, Alex?
It's 2020, but grading on that massive curve, doing okay. I'm really excited for the show today because we're joined by our really good friend and just amazing activist, Michael Lighty, the former healthcare advisor to the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I always refer to him as the plenipotentate of Medicare for all. He has been fighting this fight for a long time, and I want to have a discussion about healthcare and Medicare for all with Michael, but also more broadly about just the political context and his analysis of where we find ourselves today. So with that, Michael Lighty, thank you for joining us on Solidarity Live.
Thank you, Alex and Jocelyn. It's great to see you guys again.
So why don't we start with just the broadest sort of, can you tell us what is going on in the world? Because it just seems like chaos right now. But I do find that if you really have a sharp analysis, you can still see that we are making progress against a flailing reactionary mass, but that progressive people power is actually the most flexed, position that we've been in. There's a lot of strength, and I want to know if you're seeing the same thing.
Absolutely. It's extraordinary, the level of mobilization. Every time something goes south for the Trump administration, and that's usually every time he's on Twitter or opens his mouth, the progressive forces are further mobilized. Barrett's nomination looked like, oh man, this is just a railroad job, done deal. And all of a sudden, the pushback has been extraordinary, and it's been pretty smart. I don't think the Democrats are taking advantage of everything they could do, but the base is driving a fight back that I think is comparable to the ACA fight back, for example. Everyone said, oh, it was lost, but we carried out those actions in the Capitol, the arrests of folks with disabilities. You're getting that energy, I think, multiplied. I agree with you. And what really we see with Trump is it turns out that the Republican establishment and, the forces of racial capitalism, if you will, have chosen the wrong guy. Turns out he is as unreliable and as narcissistic and as self-destructive as we thought he would be. And so it turns out that the systemic implications of that could be profound, because it's created all sorts of new openings, just really destroy the credibility, I think, of the Republican Party and of those political forces, creating these opportunities, I think, really regardless of kind of, well, what's Joe Biden's position or what's Kamala Harris's position. I think you're right. It's the movement, mobilization that's driving the political dynamic.
Well, and Michael, I love that you were segueing into this so quickly, because Biden's platform is so much more progressive than it was at the beginning of this. Our fond memories of being in the snow in Iowa with Bernie Sanders. It is sort of remarkable how, though we didn't win the primary by any stretch of the imagination, a lot of those ideas are moving forward. And you've been beating this Medicare for all drum for a long, long time. How have you seen that evolve over the past few years?
Well, it's extraordinary because, Senator Sanders' candidacy in 2016 put it on the political map in a way it hadn't been really for decades. And then to essentially go through, the years since then, where by 2017, we had more U.S. senators on the bill than ever, right? And then it became the animating demand for Senator Sanders' 2020 candidacy. And we saw it resonate in Iowa, right? We saw it resonate among all kinds of voters. And then to suffer the defeat and it's characterized as, oh, Medicare for all has been rejected. And it turns out even very traditional polls like Pew show greater levels of support for Medicare for all than ever. Because of course, the pandemic has really driven, I think, people's perceptions that we need a system of guaranteed healthcare that has a robust public health component that can protect us, that we're all in this together, and that the employment-based insurance system has imploded. So I agree with you, Jocelyn, with there's this disconnect in the media. Joe Biden's a conservative, right? Joe Biden is opposed to Medicare for all. And yet we've made these huge gains. The public option that's contained in the platform is the most robust version we've ever seen, frankly. He didn't defend it very well at the debate, but in fact, it would cover tens, really, of millions of people with Medicare and an improved version of it.
Traditional Medicare.
Traditional Medicare, not a private plan, not some public option created specially for, low-income folks, but traditional Medicare that we can then expand. So I think
let's push on that just a second, just because we've got you and your policy mind here, just so people understand what that means. So Joe Biden has said he would lower the Medicare age to 60, which isn't far enough, but that's 5 years of people who he would add into traditional Medicare, and then a public option that would go into traditional Medicare. We want to fight to lower the Medicare age to 50 to add Medikids. So all, minors up to the age of 18 are covered by traditional Medicare. And right there, you've just expanded Medicare, the base of a single payer system, by tens of millions of people, and removed private insurance from those populations. Now then, that's a big deal. That's a huge reversal of what's been happening under Medicare Advantage, where the private insurance system have been, Trojan horsed into traditional Medicare to just empty it and hollow it out. That's a big deal. So just can you talk about that a bit?
Well, I think it is a big deal because fundamentally it means publicly financed, publicly administrated, accountable, guaranteed healthcare. Because it doesn't have the denials, it doesn't have the restrictions that private insurance places, doesn't have the problems of Medicare Advantage, which primarily revolve around narrow networks, limited, scope of providers, with still, some pretty high out-of-pocket costs. And the Medicare Advantage, as you say, is a profit machine for the private insurers. It's not a program of guaranteed healthcare. It's like, how do we create market segments of patient populations among folks over 65 to figure out how we can make the most money and drive mergers and acquisitions in the private health insurance arena. So it's fundamentally different in concept and application. And what it does is it points the way to a Medicare program. You're right. Once we get kids in, once we get people over 50, we're basically going to take the remainder who are in private insurance. They're going to realize, hey, our deal isn't so good here, right? First of all, I just lost my job and I lost my health insurance. And now how am I going to pay COBRA? How am I going to pay these high out-of-pocket costs? You know that the average premium for a family of four is over $21,000, $21,234 a year. Who can afford that if the median income for a family of four is $80,000? We're supposed to pay a fourth of our income to health insurance companies who do nothing for us except deny care. So the Medicare model represents the opposite of that. It represents a commitment to guaranteed healthcare, and that's what we've lacked in the pandemic. Because if everyone's realized, well, if I have no sustainable source of coverage, then I'm just going to be on my own, subject to a virus that's out of control that this administration has failed to combat in any kind of effective way. So I think that the healthcare issue, people kind of downplay it sometimes. I think the number one issue is people are afraid of getting COVID. They're afraid this health insurance system isn't going to work for them, and they're right.
Well, and what I'm really curious about, because you have been on top of this issue for so long. What is the disconnect when you're speaking to people who maybe don't agree with us or don't fully? Because for me, it seems so intuitive and so obvious. Healthcare costs are the number one thing that bankrupt the American family. It seems like everybody would be a single payer activist. But what is the resistance you see when you're discussing this with normal people?
The resistance really is, how do you pay for it, and can you trust government? And so the attack on the post office has to be seen as part of this broader attack on government meeting people's needs. And the post office is wildly popular, and yet the Republicans still felt they could go after it. They failed, I think, pretty clearly. But that's what's behind it is, and so when Joe Biden says he's not going to raise taxes on people making less than 400,000, Hillary said 250,000, they box themselves in around Medicare, because of course we replace private insurance premiums and deductibles and copays with taxes. That doesn't mean taxes go up. It just means we pay for actually less for healthcare through taxes, but it's used against people. And then to me, Jocelyn, my favorite thing about the Medicare for All debate is all the economists playing political scientists. I mean, just if you read these economists, whether it's Paul Krugman or these other folks, they're not opining about the economic viability of Medicare for All. It's a certainty that we're going to save $450 billion at least by going to Medicare for All, an improved version of Medicare. We know we're going to save employers half of their current healthcare costs. Individuals are going to pay literally a fraction in some cases of what they're paying now of that $21,000. So we know it's going to save tons of money, but the economists don't want to argue that. They want to argue political viability. And so what we're seeing ultimately is the power of the healthcare industry to shape what is possible politically and to buy politicians, including Democrats, who, there's a member of Congress who's a Democrat who's the largest recipient of pharma money. Richard Neal is basically a captive of the healthcare industry and private equity. He's chair of Ways and Means in the House. So this is the problem. Democratic politicians fronting for the healthcare industry and denying the huge popular support among their own base. Imagine a political party where 70 or 80% of the people who support your party want a policy and you say it's not politically viable. Well, how politically viable are you then?
That is such a great question.
And it's the number one, this is still a healthcare election. COVID and healthcare are number 1 and 2, and COVID is healthcare. So
thank you.
I want to maybe zoom out a little bit. I want to keep it around healthcare, but I love this discussion. I think that what we're seeing is actually, we're seeing it around healthcare, and what you, I think, just described is how pharmaceutical corporation, insurance money capture the political system. And it's actually capital capturing the political system. And it's not just these, you see it across the board with private equity and hedge fund managers and BlackRock and these actors who, when you dig into it, as Jocelyn and I discuss here all the time, you find the same villains, these greedy liars on Wall Street who have just sunk their tentacles into every aspect of our society and our lives, right? And they destroyed Toys R Us and KB Toys, and kids can't go to toy stores anymore because these guys need new yachts. And then they're like, oh yeah, no, they're just not economically viable, right? And that was the whole thing. And the workers are screwed, and the C-suite, the CEO get these huge bonuses because they're in it with this capitalist class. But I think what the pandemic has exposed is not just that, the healthcare, which is not a healthcare system, as we all know, it's a wealth extraction system. I think it's exposed the deficiency of capital writ large, and people are actually understanding at a very visceral level an understanding of who's on their side and of what solidarity really is, and that these assholes are more than happy to let us die. It's actually profitable for them, right? When people are seeing these billionaires making billions of dollars in a pandemic where hundreds of thousands of people have died and millions of people have lost their lives, it's really difficult for that lie that the good capitalists are just looking out for us And, it's not them who are destroying things. It's just economic viability. Am I too much there? I'm not saying it's all coming apart for them, but I'm seeing it exposed in a way. And it's natural, right? It doesn't take somebody guiding someone through an analysis. They're just seeing it on their own.
Oh no, I think you're spot on, Alex. I mean, what's the tenet of capitalist propaganda that we always hear? It's the best of all possible worlds, right? And it's kind of feels like the worst of all possible worlds right now. And that is as a direct result of what we used to just kind of be limited to the healthcare system, where huge mega corporations profited off human suffering. Now it seems like every big corporation profits off of human suffering, whether it's Amazon, right, or all the other tech companies. They're all profiting off of just a profound level of suffering and despair. And I think the other characteristic of it is that the divisions are so clear, that the racial inequities, the impacts of a racialized economic system where the essential workers are Black and Latinx and Asian Pacific Islander, Filipino. These are folks who are suffering greatly simply because they work in low-wage jobs without adequate health insurance and for rapacious corporations that refuse to protect them with personal equipment. And so you see the divisions in societies blown open by the pandemic. And it really is, the divide. I mean, in a lot of places, the housing market's on fire, right? Wealthy, professionals are able to go about their day. It's tough at times, right? With kids and school and work and balancing, but economically, financially, they're doing well. So a system that promotes itself as we can provide mass prosperity, we can provide the best of all possible worlds, right? We can meet human needs. It's all a bunch of crap, it turns out. And it took a pandemic to realize the full extent of it. But we have to lay the blame too on the Trump administration, because they're out obviously for himself first, Wall Street second, and the rest of us can go pound salt. And when it comes to a pandemic, that means the rest of us can be subject to death and disease.
Well, and I love that you bring that up, Michael, because it's so important that we realize, though this pandemic has been very difficult for all of us, and though healthcare costs are always a concern for everybody, this isn't hitting everybody the same. And that is something that, as like professionals having the conversation, that there is a schism happening in America between people who are a level of middle class where they're probably fine, and between people for whom this has been existential and whose lives might be recovering for years. There is just such a disparity both in how COVID has affected people economically and how it's affected people on a very visceral physical level. I mean, COVID clusters are popping up in lower income communities and communities of color, and that the inherent cruelty, the maliciousness of people who minimize COVID because it's not impacting their safe suburban professional community. I mean, it's difficult to overstate that. Has this been jarring for you to witness too?
Very jarring, Jocelyn. And it reminds me of Iowa, back to our time in Iowa, because Iowa is, less than 10% people of color, and the COVID cases are concentrated in those communities at like 74%. And so when I hear Kim Reynolds say we don't need a mask, when I hear Kim Reynolds say we can do business as usual, I hear Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, talking to white people and about white people, and that her constituency is white people. And so basically, hey, my folks aren't that affected unless you happen to work, side by side with a person of color or in close contact. A lot of white Iowans are avoiding this to a large extent. And I think it's reflected in her political positioning. They don't care about people of color. 9 out of 10 Republicans are white. This division is profound. And what I think is encouraging is that we're actually kind of overcoming it to some extent. That Joni Ernst is in trouble in Iowa, which is shocking, right? After the time we spent there, it's shocking, right? it's a very good sign. And so I'm not going to be on the side of writing off all white folks. I'm going to be on the side that there are good folks that we can move over. And the reason I believe that is, we have to be realistic about what it's going to take. We're not going to win over all the white nationalists, white supremacists, the people really committed to this present system of white supremacy. But we also have to understand that the material condition of white workers has a direct impact on their attitudes around race. And if the Democrats, when they were in power, had stepped up and done things like raise the minimum wage, guaranteed healthcare through Medicare for all, we wouldn't be in the same racial dynamic we're in. Imagine if the minimum wage were $22 an hour. I believe that there's at least 15% of the white working class that would be with the Democrats, just as a result of their material position being improved. So I'm pessimistic in the short term, but believe we can turn this around if we're able to appeal to folks and really improve their material lives.
I agree. And then I want to zoom out a little bit further, and then we can come back in. But I want to go global for a second, because I think another thing the pandemic has done is actually really challenged people in America to understand that, in fact, there's a whole world out there. And it often has no cares about what America, it's not just a reflection of what America's doing or anything. They're doing things on their own. And it's shocking to people that say, pick a country on the continent of Africa at random right now, and they're actually dealing with their COVID epidemics better than the United States of America. I'm literally, you can pick on the continent. You can actually do that in Europe as well, right? South America, you can't because of Bolsonaro, which, it's neck and neck of whose epidemic is going to blow up worse. But that, in fact, being the richest country in the world, which is the United States of America, in the history of the world, which is the United States of America, has not protected the people from this pandemic. When you can go to a country that is wildly less wealthy than the United States of America, and has actually been able to contain this pandemic through basic public health and solidarity. That aspect, I think, is just starting to seep in on people. And again, not the MAGA hat people who are like, it's all a hoax. And you're like, they cancel Eurovision and the Hajj to impact Trump's electoral prospects? I don't think so. There's a whole world out there, folks. But this is a pandemic is everywhere. And what America, like the capitalist mirage of America that's been pierced, is that best of all worlds, right? Like the thing was, I think there was a sort of deal that people made. They might not have even known that they made it, but they were okay a bit with suffering, with cruelty, with inequity, with the barbarity of the machine that they don't have to see, as long as they were safe. And they would be okay with the deal. I don't understand international finance, so I'm not going to worry myself about, other countries being crushed by our financial system, because maybe that's just the price we pay for the comfort that we have in this country. And again, I don't think that all of this is active in people's brains. And there's an enormous amount of propaganda that we're hit with in this country all the time to sell us that vision. And then a pandemic hits and everyone's like, we got this. We don't got this. And we never even began to got this. And it was so clear to people. And then all of their superstructure starts breaking down. Like, if we can't protect ourselves against this, like, how are we supposed to believe the mighty army of America can, like, robots and lasers, and we've got nothing to worry about? I think a lot of people are like, man, we've got a lot to worry about. And that is a huge breakthrough for people, even if they don't get anything other that I said, other than there are other countries out there besides the United States of America. And many of them are doing, most of them, the vast majority of them are doing a much better job at keeping their people safe from COVID than we are.
I'm I'm afraid you're right, Alex, and I'm afraid I was naive at the beginning of the pandemic, because I really felt like, man, this is going to bring the country together. We're going to have a sense of solidarity and taking care of each other that we haven't had, because we have to. Because if we don't do that, then this thing's going to run rampant, and people are going to die and suffer. And of course, that didn't happen. Instead, it got perverted in that American notion of possessive individualism, right? Which means I can do whatever I want, and my being able to do whatever I want is an expression of the fundamental American freedom. And that notion that it's bizarre to me that the freedom to not wear a mask is the freedom to infect others. Well, that's no kind of freedom at all. That's socially destructive narcissism. And of course, it's exemplified by the president. There is this clash of values. And I think looking at other countries who are low tech, whose population survives on a fraction of the economic wealth that we have, and yet they're protected from this virus in a way that we're not. And it should call into question this possessive individualism. My view is that it's rooted again in the racial history of the country, where to be free is to be white and to be enslaved is to be black. And that notion of white folks being able to do whatever they want is rooted fundamentally in their racial identity. And then they use that, in a capitalist system to justify all sorts of exploitations and inequalities. And of course, ultimately, the economics and the economic survival drives, what people do, and the financial barriers that result from that system, like not being able to afford healthcare. So you have chronic conditions that result in comorbidities when you develop a virus like corona, plays itself out. And I think we've got to go back to that fundamental vision of kind of what you described and what your program's about, of solidarity. That is our only way out of the kind of individualism that's taken over and is so socially destructive. If we honestly believe in kindness, that we are of a human kind, that we create a healthcare system based on caregiving, not industry profits, we can have a different ethos, an alternative ethos in society. And the pandemic cries out for it. And I fear that the absence of that sense of solidarity and caregiving will ultimately render whatever measures we take around the pandemic not effective, unless we change in a fundamental way, the basis of our society.
Well, I think, Michael, I really share your sort of complicated optimism in many ways, and I love it. But I too, at the beginning of this with Alex, we were on here like, yeah, we're going to come together and fight COVID. But I think that we are building that slowly. And I think that there is the problem of what's happening in this country, politicizing something as black and white as a public health disaster, is that you're creating partisanship in what should be neutral, almost banal questions of public safety. But I think my hope for us is the absurdity of that is going to eventually reveal itself. And people are going to be like, okay, this has been so insane. How do we come together and just fight for a common good? And by the way, while we're on the topic, when did coming together and fighting for a common good become a radical notion? Like, I don't think anything that anyone has said on here today is particularly crazy or out there. I mean, have I missed something? Have you guys heard anything crazy or out there?
Not me.
Wear your mask, stay safe.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think, it always comes back to Iowa, which is my favorite state in the union. When we were out there, were you guys we were talking to people in their homes about Medicare for all, about healthcare justice. And it really struck me the way the mainstream media has gaslit Americans into thinking these are crazy out there notions. When you go to somewhere as deeply American as the Midwest, and the people who want this are what you would consider to be mainstream, moderate, family oriented Americans. I mean, is that shocking to you too?
It was, Jocelyn, it was surprising to me because we go into the most suburban middle class homes of white professionals, and they are down for Medicare for all in a serious way, and they want to go deep, and they are motivated, right? They were motivated to support Senator Sanders. I mean, people really misunderstand, I think, how motivated folks were around these policies, and Medicare for all being prominent because it addresses the fears that Alex mentioned, and I think you're totally spot on about the willingness of folks that the media believes is somehow, opposed or, negative toward Medicare for all. Well, they're not. You don't get this kind of level of support among Democrats, 70%, unless you're reaching, middle-class folks who are very mainstream in their values, right? So I tend to think that this, that the media really misunderstands what's going on. Right. And I think you're right.
On purpose. We know that.
Right.
We can say that on our show, Michael. We don't have any corporate sponsors. Before we have a political revolution, we need a media revolution because the corporate media are the propagandists for the billionaires. I mean, they own them. That's their job is to protect their bosses, and their bosses are the people who are profiting off of suffering. That's just the way it is.
I mean, I agree with the analysis, Alex and Jocelyn. I don't know if you do that. The free media that Joe Biden got in that period after he won South Carolina, maybe $70 million, maybe $100 million worth, was decisive in some respects.
Totally. Oh, 100%.
And I would say the negative on from Nevada to South Carolina on Bernie was also decisive. I mean, like, you remember Rachel Maddow started on the Nevada caucus night saying if the establishment Democrats don't all come together, Bernie Sanders is going to win, and that was literally on repeat. And I watch ABC just to have a eye into corporate media or what people are consuming. And it's you got Rahm Emanuel on there.
Literally,
you got
all the time. Yeah,
you got Rahm Emanuel. He's their contributor. You had Chris Christie in there. Like, well, what does this mean? You two failed politicians who are horrible.
Thank you.
You're like, let's bring on the losers to tell us how to win. And you're like, why don't you not do that?
Okay,
but that's what they do.
This is why I feel like there is just this bizarre cultural phenomenon where we are real America, we Bernie bros are America. And you have this bizarre thing where all these people want this progressive agenda, which, by the way, I think we can agree, the Overton window has gone so far right. This isn't actually that progressive, anything we're saying. And then you have this weird media politosphere of I don't want to call them elites because that sounds like Trump rhetoric, but they're very elite people that live in coastal cities and make a lot of money, creating narratives about people they don't know, people they don't understand, people they haven't lived among in so long. And so you have this very real case of a narrative that doesn't match the country it's about. And that's why we got to go back to Des Moines and do more live streams.
I will say I'm going to disagree with you on one thing, Jocelyn. Iowa is not my favorite state in the union.
How dare you?
We had a great time in Iowa, but New Mexico is a really beautiful state. And California is a fantastic state. And California is, like, to me, the one of the things you can see with the sort of propaganda machine of the corporate media is this painting of, California is this massive American success story all the time whenever Republicans aren't in charge, right? Like when they actually just taxed rich people just a small amount And you have this really functioning state that's enormous. It has a huge population. And I think that it annoys me. So like, much love to all of my fam in Iowa, but I don't think Iowa should be determining the direction of this country at the level that it does. Neither do I think that Wyoming should, right? And DC should have more of a vote than Wyoming, because I'm a majoritarian type guy. I hate the Senate. I hate the Great Compromise. I don't want people in California and New York not to have health care because some folks in Wyoming are scared of something. I want the people to actually have a voice in what we want. And when we do, we're not disagreeing, Jocelyn, because when you actually talk to the people, it is these ideas, these big ideas are not radical. They're supported by the vast majority of people. It's just when you then put it through this chessboard that is our just totally ridiculous political system, where you have, the bicameral, the Senate has way more power for low population states, and then the electoral college. I mean, these are all ideas that they're like, how do we keep the slave owners happy? And we've inherited them and been like, these are sacred. These are sacred institutions that we cannot mess with. And you're like, these are dumb. These are dumb institutions that should be abolished. And that brings me to sort of California. California has done, it faced a lot of the brunt of the pandemic. It was very early on there. California is also not, it's not homogenous. So there's a bunch of population centers. We probably should have cut California up into a few states in the beginning and we'd be in a better place here. But my question to you, Michael, because I know you're working on it, I have a dream that the West Coast could move faster, even under, like, no matter how moderate a Biden potential administration is, either, the West Coast will be the bulwark against fascism of a reelected Trump, or will be the vanguard of a progressive, what a progressive recovery looks like, and might have to drag the country kicking and screaming with it. Do you think that has any fact to it?
I think it does. I think it has a great deal of fact to it. And is in direct contrast with the illegitimate national political institutions you mentioned, is that there is really a sense that a broad support for a progressive approach to governance and to addressing the inequities. Now, that doesn't mean that we're doing a great job. I mean, the Central Valley has huge economic inequality. But what's remarkable about California is that there is broad consensus that science is real, that exactly, that public policy can improve people's lives and can direct a future that is sustainable and equitable. And so, and when it comes to healthcare, this governor is committed to single payer. We get a Biden administration in there that allows states to actually set up universal healthcare programs, which they're committed to do. We're going to see, I think, a kind of universal single payer healthcare system, in the next 4 years. Oregon and Washington are coming along too on that.
What we're seeing, does regional work, Michael? I mean, because what I could see so easily is like California goes first, then Oregon adds, then Washington adds, then Nevada's like, I'm in New Mexico, right? And then they just keep adding into a risk pool, and then that just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that, just as a wonk, as a nerd for a second, that's the magical part of providing healthcare, is that the more people you provide it to, the stronger the system is, which is the opposite of trying to extract wealth, right? Like they need to narrow it and only take the healthy people and exclude the sick people. But in a universal system, everybody in, nobody out actually makes the system stronger. So like I could see a cascading effect like that. Do you think, or just tell me what your read on how things would go is?
Well, I think that's right, Alex. I think that's exactly right. And Washington and Oregon and California all have commissions set up to establish universal health care. So they're all working on the same project, and it's really not a stretch to put these programs together. And as you say, the more people in, the better off the system. When we do better, we all do better, right? And it's not that difficult administratively if you have a cooperative federal government. That's really what it comes down to. The Trump administration's let these, conservative states decimate healthcare systems, try to block grant Medicaid, right, which restricts access, and do all these other nefarious things, these short-term health plans, which are very destructive and don't cover pre-existing conditions. So, I mean, it's not like, you can't experiment, but let's experiment with universality. Let's experiment with solidarity. Let's experiment with cost savings. And it's very doable, I think. And it takes some leadership, but you also don't have the opposition. I mean, we're in a state, California, where Biden's lead over Trump is 31%. People don't realize, like, the wholesale rejection of that worldview is the basis for progressive politics, right? And I think it does to some extent go back to a belief in science, in rationality, but mostly I think it goes back, which is shocking after having breathed smoke for weeks, to a sense of optimism. It is, you can't avoid the sense in California that a better world is possible.
Well, and Michael, as you're talking, sorry, I know we went way over. We're still going over. It's fine, whatever. As you're talking about hope, it brings me back to what Alex was saying about this is all by design. The confusion is by design. The despair is by design. And so for us, hope is our biggest tool, because it's like you're saying, these things require leadership, but they're far from impossible. They're far from outlandish, and a sense of hope and like, wow, we can actually do these things. We can live in a world where if a pandemic happens, it doesn't look this way. We can live in a world where a cancer diagnosis isn't also a financial death knell. These are very workable things that the rest of developed world has managed, and hope is really what we need right now, not cynicism, because that plays into these corporate establishment powers. They want us to feel cynical, so we won't try to change anything. I mean, do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I think hope is the foundation for action. And we have to understand that, that there are people who are, in California who are leaving, or who are, very, very badly affected by the pandemic and by the economic crisis that the Trump administration has created. And the Republicans, by refusing to actually provide the financial support, it wouldn't be that hard, right? And so if as Californians, we feel like our values and our approach, which honestly we do, we do feel like California has a huge impact on the direction of the country. And that gives us hope as well, because we really do see, we've said from the beginning, we're kind of the state of resistance, right, against Trump, but it goes beyond that, because now we're going to have to formulate a real policy toward the climate crisis. We can guarantee healthcare for all. We're going to tax commercial entities through this Proposition 15. Looks like it has a chance to win. That would generate $7 to $12 billion more for education in local communities. And so we're going to take these resources, one way or the other. We're going to take these resources from the tech millionaires and from the wealthy in California and distribute them in a way that promotes economic equality and addresses climate crisis and guarantees healthcare. And that notion of hope is why people come to California in the first place. It's a cliche, okay, but it does represent a different cultural direction, cultural foundation, that sense of optimism. And ultimately, we hear about American optimism, right? But the Republicans have turned it into such a cynical, divided country, and they're supposed to be the representatives of the, of the American ethos of possibility, and yet they've turned us into a narrow, self-hating group of people who can barely get along with each other if you happen to disagree. That's not how we live out here, and I think that's not how most Americans want to live. And at some level, the Republicans have sown the seeds of their own destruction by dividing us against each other. They're the ones who are going to be taken out.
I think it's a great note to end on, Michael. I'm going to give you the final word, but Jocelyn is probably noting just how much I plagiarized from you in our calls to action of how it is truly only through solidarity that we can overcome the power of the global financial elite, the billionaire class, who they don't care about anything except their own wealth. They don't care about country, they don't care about people, they don't care about state, they don't care about anything except themselves. And they have a tremendous impact, but it's all predicated on hopelessness or powerlessness, people believing that there's no ability to fight back. But as soon as we start flexing our muscle and seeing that we do have the ability to fight back, it's sort of it's exponential growth in people sort of coming into their own and their understanding that there is no cavalry coming. We are the cavalry. We have to do this. But when we do it, we can build a better future. And we're going to at least try to build a better future instead of wallowing in misery and despair that nothing is possible. And I think that is what we could come out of a crisis, the magnitude of which we're seeing, can actually be a crucible that creates this solidarity of equal magnitude. And we saw that before in the creation of the New Deal, coming out of the crisis of the Great Depression, and that kind of shock to the system. It can go the other way, and that's why we need to fight so hard right now to defeat the fascists. But coming out of that, we do have this amazing chance to build something better. And I want to thank you for your work in trying to do that, and give you the sort of last word about the work that you're doing in California, and if you want, how people can get involved with that work.
Well, I have to say that that your perspective there is very inspiring, because the fascists, the right wing, want us to hate ourselves, our society, and people who aren't like us so much that we do nothing. And the antidote to that is the solidarity you talk about, rooted in love and justice. And that's, some highfalutin stuff, but it is, I think, really ultimately what's going to determine our reality. And so, in California, we're working to have the governor do a waiver, federal waiver, to enable us to do single payer. We're engaged with the legislature on that effort to move single payer, but also things like Prop 15 to tax commercial insurance, push back on Prop 22 and the rapacious effort of Uber and Lyft to determine worker standards, right, in the gig economy. And we're working to end cash bail and restore affirmative action. These are hopeful signs. And it's not because Californians are different from other folks. It's just that a lot of us here believe in that love and justice and solidarity that can transform our country. And we want to find like-minded folks all over the country, and we have. And we're also, as you say, engaged in a global fight where there is this new demand for global justice. Let's be inspired by that too. So thank you.
Michael Lighty, thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can do it again soon. These conversations are really recharge the batteries in our fight. So thank you so much for joining us on Solidarity Live. Jocelyn, what do you think?
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Now I miss Des Moines. You remember Des Moines, Iowa, Alex? I can't believe you were talking shit on Iowa. That's our favorite place. Don't take this from me.
I mean, I'm just saying that when it comes to states, I've been to most of them, and I have a ranking, and I like Iowa, but I'll say New Mexico is my favorite state. Have you been to New Mexico?
I do like New Mexico. I
Okay,
had some
good.
good blueberry tortillas, which I am not making up. It was a good time.
Yeah, but what about green chili? I mean, green chili is amazing. So we got to talk with Michael for a long time, and I think that I've traveled with Michael and worked with him for a long time, and I do believe that what we're seeing right now is something that we talked about. I mean, I remember working on single payer stuff with Michael back when it was, very much excluded from the national dialogue. But we were like, at some point, there'll be an awakening to just how stupid it is to let these bureaucrats in $6,000 suits, these Wall Street bureaucrats, deny us care, kill us and kill our family, and then send us a bill at the end of it. When that is a choice that we let that system be perpetrated on us. And we've seen it. We're not there yet, but many more people understand the stakes of the game right now, and the willingness to talk about what's needed is huge. Just today, there was an announcement by India and South Africa that all COVID-related treatments and everything should be patent-free. And what anyone who worked in the HIV world and in global public health knows is that with the two of those countries, you could actually have a patent-free system. That is the generic production. Those two countries alone, you could produce all the drugs that you wanted and just ignore countries that are saying that, no, the people pay for the research and development, but we need to let these parasite billionaires profit off of it. That's radical. That's new. And that's big. We had to push them there last time. And now there's a movement pulling us in that direction.
Well, and I do want to talk a little bit more about hope, because I don't think I do that enough. I know we talk about it a lot, but more. Let's talk about more hope.
More
hope now. Okay, so here's the thing. I understand leftists, including myself, and our dark humor and our love of, because we're staring into the void and it's a little bit alienating, and all these Republicans are telling us that neither climate change nor coronavirus is real. So I think there's an understandable psychological reaction to be, okay, no, we need to talk about all these bad things that are happening. But something, Alex, that you and I talk about all the time is these are fixable problems with pretty straightforward solutions that we have dealt with far worse before. We've dealt with far worse not that long ago. I mean, you look back over the past 200 years, abolishing slavery, World War II, Nazis that were, smarter than Trump is. We have overcome so much. And this hope has to be our staying power, and this solidarity, and this sense of we can fix these problems. It's not all bad.
It's not all bad. Or else what would we be fighting for? That's why we talk about art and music. And I get some hope from things like the Pope just came out with his latest encyclical, which is a big deal for Catholics, which I'm not a Catholic.
You're a recovering Catholic.
I left the Catholic Church because there's so much terrible in the institution, but the parts that I took with me, the preferential option for the poor and liberation theology, I brought into where I am now. I'm like a Unitarian liberation theologist. But I read what the Pope put out there, and then because I think the Catholic Church is generally a massive small c conservative institution. It's a traditionalist. It's supposed to be very slow, right? Like that's their whole idea is to slow things. But the Catholic Church is now on this encyclical way ahead of where the United States is, saying that there's a universal a brotherhood of people that everybody deserves materially to be able to live in this life, and that inequality is rotting the system. And basically, he's saying billionaires are actively killing all of us. He's just doing it in poppies. And that gives me hope, because I look at institutions like that, like big shifts are happening, and I realize that America is super important, but we're also not the whole thing. And we will join and get dragged kicking and screaming maybe, but the magnitude of this crisis that we're facing, I think, will be matched by the magnitude of what we have to do to get out of it. And it's all pointing towards solidarity and a fight against this small group of people owning all the wealth, all the power, and watching the world burn.
Well, yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking back to how we started this conversation, which is, look, nobody on this show was a Biden person, to say the least. And I still think we still have a lot of melancholy about how things went with the primary, which is why I'm writing a melancholy novel about it. But that's another story. But like at the end of the day, this is a very progressive platform we have. This is a very progressive public that we have. There's a lot we do have that's on our side. And yes, I realize that Trump could still win, but he's a terrible candidate at this point. I mean, his polling numbers are not good. There is so much momentum at our backs. And I think it's like it's like we always say, if we can really focus on all the things that are in our favor and these very real and very existential fights that we're going into, I think that's what's going to carry us through this. That and the art museum in Des Moines, which I think is the finest in the union.
I don't agree about the museum, but it's not finest, but extraordinarily
good.
Extraordinarily fantastic. And I will talk some smack on museums that don't hit the mark. But everyone who can should visit the I forgot the name of it, but the art museum in Des Moines. My son still wears his "I'm an activist" T-shirt all the time.
That's so cute.
But I want to just say that it's also, there's a old socialist saying or phrase of the only thing we have to lose is our chains. And the idea of that is that people's backs are against the wall. And the only question is, do we walk forward or not? We're up against these forces, and it's bleak, but the future that they're painting is terrible. It's barbarity.
Yes.
And the only alternative is the people coming together and being like, no, Jeff Bezos, you're not going to Mars. We're taking your money and giving it to the people. Same with you, Elon Musk. It was all based on public investment in the first place. And these public goods need to have a return for the people. So again, in closing, I can sign us off. Oh
no, wait, are we out of time?
We are out of time. I'll throw it over to you, though, to sign us off. But I will say that through solidarity, we can smash our chains, student debt, medical bankruptcy, all of the economic inequalities that we are seeing today. Those are the modern construct that we're held in by these financialized forces that profit off of us being held in servitude to their money. And we can break out of that, but only with solidarity.
Well, and sorry, Alex, I interrupted what I think was going to be a very beautiful.
That was it.
Can I say one more thing? Am I good?
Of course.
So, back to the most beautiful state of the union, Iowa. I do think it's really important that we on the left remember that we are fighting for a beautiful standard of living for all of us. I think too often we create a narrative where like they're the rich and we're the poors. No, we in America all deserve a standard of living where we can travel, educate ourselves, have access to healthcare. And I think when we really internalize how beautiful that vision of life is, we're going to fight a lot harder for it. So I know we're over, but we love you all so very much. And we'll see you soon. Through solidarity, we can do all things.
Bye.